Just want to hop on here and talk a little bit about a lot of things. Well, things that you guys don't know about me, because this is a brand new channel, and obviously, people across the world might see this, or nobody might see it. But anyway, so I am 46 years old. I actually just turned 46 on March 5th, a couple of days ago, which is 2026, and I. I have some things about me that I want to share that, not everybody has, and everybody has their own stuff. So I have two different disabilities. One is visual in nature. The other is like a neurological processing problem. I have, with vision, I have problems with acuity, meaning distance, depth perception, problem with spatial relations. I am also colorblind, and I'm not even sure that it's a genetic form of colorblindness or not. It might be, I don't know. But that's what I have going on. So, and why that's important is I want to talk a little bit about how having two different disabilities has impacted my life. So, growing up, when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school, because of the disability that I had or have, I was able to receive accommodations. And I had what's called an IEP, or Individualized Education Plan, which basically means that the people in the special ed department and the teachers and my parents, mostly my mom, and I would meet with everybody in a meeting at the school to discuss, the plan for the coming year as far as what accommodations I would need, how my progress is, are the accommodations sufficient, am I doing okay, and things like that. And so what I also got as a result of having that disability is I got accommodations, and the accommodations were, because they're visual in nature, like one of my visual problems is distance seeing. So I was allowed and really almost required to sit in the front row in classes and stuff like that. And that helped me for learning purposes, number one, because being in the front, it forces you to pay attention. But also, the reason I was sitting in the front primarily is because of distance. So my visual problems were such that even with glasses, I don't see 20/20. Therefore, unless I was sitting in the front row, I might not be able to read what the teacher is putting on the blackboard or on the overhead projector. Back when I was in school, they had overhead projectors. I don't even know if they use those in schools anymore, but that's what they used, as blackboards and overhead projectors. Whether it could have been a PowerPoint presentation. Unless I was sitting in the front row, I might not be able to see this stuff. And even if I was sitting in the front row, depending on how small the print was, I might still need an additional, hand copy handed to me of what's being presented. And that was just, one of the major accommodations that I had in schools, to be able to learn at the same pace that other people did and learn the same things. And even then, even still, I had difficulty learning. I don't want to say, I was fine. I never failed a class. I was in all regular classes. I never took any special ed classes. I was all in regular education classes with Gen Pop, if you want to call it that. And so it was fine. And it was a little weird, though, because again, at elementary school, like you when you're in that situation, you get picked on a lot of the times, not because necessarily I had a disability or because I had any sort of accommodations, although that was probably part of the reason why I got picked on, but because when you are associated with special ed in any way, shape, or form in schools, you are outcast from the rest of the class, and they perceive you differently because of these types of things, even like unconsciously. They're not, maybe not intentionally perceiving you differently, but that's kind of how it is. So to some extent, I was picked on a little bit, but also just felt alone, like I'm not like everybody else. And I experienced that in elementary school. And as I got older in middle school, I still had some of those same feelings and some of those same experiences with being outcast from the rest of the students. But I felt more integrated, if you will. And maybe that was because I learned how to learned how to, compensate for my disability, right? That could have been a reason for it. Um, and things like that. And also people are just maturing, right? So at a certain point in school, like nobody cares what's going on with another student, right? If you're getting extra help or whatever, no big deal. But anyway, so that was my experience in elementary school. Middle school, it was a little bit less so. I mean, I still had the same services as far as IEP services and special ed services without being in special ed classes due to the visual stuff. And it was sort of alluded to that I had a processing problem as well, and I'll get to that in a little bit because that plays to where I'm currently at. But nobody really told me like what my processing problem was or the nature of it. They just sort of alluded to it that it's mostly visual. Anytime I ask my parents about it, they're like, it's mostly visual. I'm like, okay, no problem. So I go through high school. In high school, same sort of accommodations. The primary one that was really helpful to me, though, is when I took the ACT to get into college. You had to have decent ACT score to get into college. And the ACT is a standardized timed test that everybody across the country could potentially get or take. And because of my disability and the accommodations that I was getting in school, I was also able to get extra time on exams, both regular exams for classes, whether it was math or social studies or language arts, but also for the ACT, which was hugely important. It's not that I didn't know the information, it's just that the processing speed and the visual stuff might have been a little bit off. So I was able to get extra time, which was hugely helpful. I still only got like a 21 on my ACT, so but it allowed, maybe I would have gotten something, maybe I would have gotten like a 17 or something because would have had to operate at a quicker pace than I would otherwise be able to do. So glad I got the extra time there. College had extra time on exams, also front row. Didn't really need extra time on many exams, but there were a couple that I did, and I did okay. But I'm saying all this to say the other thing is with the vision is because I don't see 20/20, and because of these other visual problems that sort of compound that, it took me a little bit longer to learn to drive than it would a person who's normal sighted, you could say, who doesn't have a visual deficit. And so, my dad worked with me tirelessly to learn how to drive. Basically, just practicing. Right, he would take me out on the road, and I would drive, just like parents help their kids learn to drive. That's kind of how that works when they have a driver's permit. So, my dad worked with me tirelessly to do that. And I just needed extra time and the things like that to learn how to do it. And I eventually learned how to drive, and everything was fine. But again, I still have these deficits that are, impacting me in different areas of life. But again, I go to college and I do okay and everything's fine. And then one of the things that happened to me in my particular case with a disability is I got my bachelor's degree, and then I worked in a group. I was in mental health type of field, so social work, psychology, that sort of thing. My bachelor's is in psychology. And then after the bachelor's in psychology, I worked for 2 years as a direct care worker in a group home with youth at risk of, they were at risk. I'll just say that because I don't want YouTube to flag this video, but they were at risk. They were, troubled youth, you could say. And that was my job, to be a direct care worker at a group home for kids, that are like, roughly 10 to 17 years of age. And that job did not require a degree, but I had a degree. And my plan was to, get a more professional type of job at some point, whether that required me to get an additional degree or not. I did ultimately pursue a master's degree in social work, out of state from where I am. I'm from Michigan, but I pursued a master's degree at the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus, not College Park. Same thing, just a professional school that had all grad programs. So I was in the MSW program there. I got my degree. I also, I'm an alcoholic, so I was drinking my way all through this experience. I haven't had a drink since 2007, but I graduated in 2008 from grad school. So that meant I was drinking for 2 out of the 3 years that I was in grad school. And again, still having the disability stuff as well, and still getting accommodations where necessary. And one of the things after grad school, one of the things that I discovered is once I started doing real professional type of jobs that require, you know, the ability to process things really, really quickly, the ability to multitask. You know, like I ran into some difficulties where I was working and I was trying to do the job, but there was a disconnect in how I was being taught to do the job and whether I was being taught to do the job or just thrown in, my ability to pick it up. And I just couldn't pick it up as quickly as my employers would have wanted to. And this happened at multiple jobs, but the interesting thing is not one single employer that I ever had fired me as a result of that. I was like, I want to quit at a certain point because I saw the writing on the wall. I saw that I wasn't able to do the job well or wasn't able to, but I didn't know, okay, this is because of a disability. Because I thought, again, you know, the way that my family portrayed my disability to me, because they talked to doctors and specialists and all the things, is that I had visual problems. What they did not highlight, which was hugely important, was that I have a neurological processing problem. And they also didn't know, they also couldn't really explain to me why I had that problem or that I did have that problem. And so I'm failing at these jobs and I'm talking to my family and I'm like, why am I failing at these jobs? Like, this is frustrating. And my parents were like, oh, you just needed to try harder. You just need extra time. I'm like, it's the real world. You can't get extra time in the real world. You really can't. I mean, you can in some instances, but for the most part, you can't. And I'm just going through this and going through this and going through this. And no matter what I said, my parents were like, you just need to try harder. You just need to get a better night's sleep. You just make sure that you need to eat healthy and that you're focused. And maybe you need to take some medication for ADD or ADHD or whatever. But there was never this, okay, we need to provide some sort of accommodation for it. There was nothing like, and I think they did need to provide some accommodation for it. I did need an accommodation for it. But I didn't know that. And I kept saying, why am I failing? And my mom was like, well, you have visual problems. And I'm like, something wrong. There was a disconnect in my brain that I intuitively sensed between what I was processing in my brain and the work that I was being asked to do. And my family kept saying, oh, it's just visual. You're just overthinking it. And it turned out I did have something else going on. But they did not fully understand that. They were really focused on vision. Hardly anything was mentioned about this alleged processing problem that I sort of sensed I had and that my parents alluded to when I was growing up, but nobody really fully understood. Long story short, a bunch of jobs did not work out for me. I mean, a bunch. And I never got fired from those jobs. They just did not work out for me. And I quit because I just felt this intuitive inability to do the job, but I couldn't articulate why. It was like my brain wasn't working properly in those particular contexts. And, you know, with the process, you have to process things quickly. You got to multitask. You got to shift priorities, all the things. And this was one of the most frustrating and humiliating experiences of my life because everyone, family, friends, coworkers at these jobs, bosses, they're all looking at me like, you seem pretty intelligent. What is good? Like they couldn't get that I was having a difficulty in the first place and or why. And I didn't get it either because I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but something is going on. And ultimately I failed in enough jobs and there was a huge gap in my resume. And ultimately my parents sought the help of a psychologist that did neuropsychological testing with me because that was his specialty. Why they didn't do that in the first place, I don't know, but that was their own process of learning about my disability. And yeah, the neuropsychologist was like, yeah, you have a processing problem and it's most likely the result of, and here's the kicker, is brain damage. And how I got the brain damage is because I have a condition called hydrocephalus. And it's otherwise called water on the brain. It's basically where, if left unchecked, a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid builds up in my head, cuts off oxygen supply to my brain, and I die. And that happens, and everybody has cerebral spinal fluid flowing through their central nervous system. Everybody has that. And in a normal person, it drains properly out of the abdomen, whatever, however it drains. In my case, when you have this condition, it doesn't drain. So I have what's called a shunt. I don't know if anybody can see this here, but it's basically, it's inside my skull or inside my head. And it's a tube that drains cerebral spinal fluid from my head to my abdomen and out of my body, so that there's no buildup. And that is like life sustaining. I need that in order to survive. But I'm saying all that to say that I had to learn that I had an additional disability that nobody really fully knew about. And that, I mean, I lost a bunch of jobs. And so now, like after that happened, I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do? I just, like, I have this huge gap in my resume because I'm not going to put jobs that I had for between 1 and 3 months and I quit because I had this thing that just didn't make sense to me. And so I quit because I couldn't figure out the job and didn't have an accommodation because I didn't know I needed one. Like, I'm not going to put those on my resume. There's a bunch of those jobs. So that meant there was a gap. In lieu of that, there's a huge gap in my resume. And every time I'm going to apply for another job, because I quit the previous one, it's that much harder to get a job because they'll ask about job history and why do I have these gaps? Well, because I quit that job, or because I couldn't find it. I had to make up something. Like, it was just very, very challenging. And so, like, because you need a job in order to get a job, that's just kind of how it works. It's kind of a double-edged sword. And so this was like a really, really humiliating time in my life, like really hugely humiliating. Ultimately, I found out so I obviously, once I fully understood that I had a disability, by then it was like too late to get back into social work, which is what I was doing for a career. That's what I intended to do with a master's degree. You don't go to 7 years of school to not do that. I mean, it wasn't something I was just casually pursuing. It was something that I wanted to do, but I lost, a bunch of those jobs didn't work out. So I was left with, okay, what do I do? Do I go back and do social work jobs that I previously failed at, but now I know that I have a disability and now I know that I could potentially request an accommodation, or do I just start brand new? And I did not want to fail again, because I'm telling you what, that was failing at those jobs and people looking at me like I'm smart, but I'm feeling stupid because I cannot do these jobs, was the most humiliating experience of my life. I mean, one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. So I'm saying all this to say, if you have a disability, or if you sense that you might have a disability, get tested. Get tested. Don't listen to your family. Don't listen to your friends if they're telling you not to get tested, or if they're minimizing what you're going through. Because in my case, like, had my family listened to my pleas when I kept saying, hey, I think something's going on, when I first started in the professional world, I feel like my outcome would have been a lot better and different. But it is what it is, and you've got to kind of play the hand you're dealt, and that's what I'm doing. I'm currently a real estate agent, and I have been since 2019. But there's still that part of me that feels like, man, like, what if I knew about this disability? What if I knew about this neurological processing problem? Would I be able to succeed at social work jobs, because I would have had a necessary accommodation that I could have requested? And I'll never know. I just will never know unless I try to go back to it. But even now, like, I might fail because I'm rusty, because I haven't done social work in so long. But so that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm 46 years old. And to be honest with you, like, I currently live with my parents because it has been hard for me to, like, rebound financially and socially and all the things from this setback. And it's just been really hard. So listen to your gut. If your gut is telling you something, follow it. It doesn't mean, people say your gut will never lie to you. I don't know about that. You might actually be wrong, but I ultimately think that if you continue to follow your gut, you will be led eventually to what turns out to be the right move and the right decision. And for me, like, listening to a bunch of people who thought they knew what was going on with me but didn't, really burned me. So I hope that helps somebody. Sorry for the long video, but I really wanted to just delve deep into kind of who I am and what I've been through. I mean, it's been very challenging. So, but let me know if you have any questions. If anybody has a disability or has a question about a disability, like, drop the questions in the comments, or your reactions or whatever, and I'll respond.